Hello class, how are you? I haven't sent you the video for a week, so today I'm going to record a video for the unit 14. Is it about adjective clause? Unit 14 is about adjective clause, part B. Okay, for the previous video you learned the adjective clause part A. That is about defining relative clause. Today you are going to study the relative clause part B. That is about non-defining relative clause. Non-defining relative clauses. Okay, last week you have learned what about defining relative clause. What is defining relative clause? So today you study non-defining relative clause. What is non-defining relative clause? Non-defining relative clauses are placed after nouns which are definite already. So non-defining relative clause is used to add more meaning to describe noun or pronoun that is already understood, already clear. They do not therefore define the noun, but merely add something to it by giving some information about it. They are not essential in the sentence and can be omitted without causing confusion. So for non-defining relative clause, it is just used to add some more meaning. But the noun is already understood. We can erase the relative clause without causing confusion because the noun already understood. Example here, actually. Okay, they are separated from their noun by comma. So when the non-defining relative clause is used, comma also used to separate the non-defining relative clause. The pronoun can never be omitted in a non. This is a non-defining relative clause. Okay, sorry, please continue. So the pronoun can never be omitted in a non-defining relative clause. So when non-defining relative clause is used, so the pronoun cannot be omitted. Relative pronoun cannot be omitted. Okay, non-defining relative clause pronoun. Non-defining relative pronoun. Okay, subject is subject pronoun, is object pronoun, is possessive. So for people we use who for the subject, and whom or who for object. Possessive we use whose. For thing we use which for subject. Object we also use which. For possessive we use what? Whose or of which. Okay, non-defining relative clause for people. That is the pronoun that used for people is who. Who used for subject. Example. Okay, no other pronoun is possible. So when the subject of the pronoun, or when the relative pronoun is used as non-defining, when it's non-defining relative clause, only who that can be used. The professor, example, the Professor Wilson who teaches chemistry 101 is an excellent lecturer. So the Professor Wilson is the noun is already understood because the noun is clear. It's the name of the specific person. So when the noun is already understood, the clause here is not necessary. It's not important. That's what we call non-defining relative clause. And when non-defining relative clause used, the comma is used to separate the relative clause. And it's only who that can be used. We cannot use that. Mr. Smith, who is a retired teacher, does volunteer work at the hospital. So Mr. Smith is already understood, already known. So who is retired? Teacher is the non-defined relative clause and is separated by commas. One more. Mr. Kamlai, who was prominent political analyst, was shot dead last month. Okay, one more. Object. Okay, object. For the pronoun, relative pronoun that used for object is whom or who in non-defined relative clause. The pronoun cannot be omitted. Whom is the correct form, though who is sometimes used in conversation. So, okay, the grammatical is pronoun that is used is whom for object, but who also can be used, especially in conversation in spoken English. Example: Mr. Lee, whom I met yesterday, teaches chemistry. So Mr. Lee is the name of a specific person. So this is already understood. Whom I met yesterday is the relative pronoun. Whom is the object. Whom is the object pronoun that used to replace Mr. Lee. And the non-defined relative clause here is separated by commas. One more. Dr. Phil, whom she visited last week, was very kind. So Dr. Phil is the specific name, Professor Dr. Phil, whom she visited last week is the non-defined relative clause, and whom is the object pronoun. So whom is the object pronoun that is grammatically used in this place. We can also use who, but it's in spoken English. Object pronoun, object of a proposition, whom. We use whom as an object of proposition. The pronoun cannot be omitted. When the pronoun is the object of the proposition, cannot be omitted. The proposition is normally placed before whom. So this is very grammatically. Example: Mr. John, for whom I was working, was very generous about overtime payment. So for whom, for is the proposition. So for can precede the relative pronoun, and when proposition is placed before relative pronoun, only whom they can be used and cannot be omitted in this. One more example: Mr. Tom, about whom I told you, got engaged last week. So about whom, about the proposition. So this is very grammatically that we use about whom. We say about whom. So only whom that can be used after proposition. This is very grammatically. It is, however, possible to move the proposition to the end of the clause. This is commonly done in conversation, and who then usually take the place of whom. So when we move the proposition at the end of the relative clause, we can also use who instead of whom, especially in spoken English. Example: you can say, Mr. John, who I was working for, was very generous about overtime payment. Or we can say, Mr. Tom, who I told you about, got engaged last week. So we can use who when we place proposition at the end. Proposition at the end for this is about. One more. She's saying David, who she got a present from. So we place the proposition at the end of the relative clause, non-defined relative clause. So we can use who, especially in spoken English. One more, possessive. Pronoun that use as a possessive for people, we use whose. Example, and whose children are at school all day is trying to get a job. Whose children, I mean the children belong to the Mrs. Ann, and children. So whose is better possessive. One more, Mr. North, whose students come from different countries, is English native speaker. So Mr. North is the specific name, the name of specific people or person. And we use whose to replace for people that is expected possession. Whose student, I mean Mr. North's student or his student, come from different country. So non-defining clause is non-defining clause, and whose is better possessive, and we use comma to separate the non-defining relative clause. One more, Mrs. Aboriginal, whose husband was shot dead, will live for Australia example. One more, non-defining relative clause used for thing. So the relative pronoun used for thing is, what is it? Subject we use which. That is also used. That is not used here. So for grammatically use which, that is not cannot be used in non-defining relative clause. Example: Hawaii, which consists of 8 principal islands, is a favorite vacation spot. So Hawaii is the name of a specific place, that is the thing. So we use which is grammatically, which consists of 8 principal island is the relative clause. A relative clause here add meaning to the specific name we call non-defining relative clause. Because it is not important, although we do not use a relative clause here, but it's still already understood because Hawaii is a specific name, also already known. So we can erase the non-defining relative clause here. We can omit it. But we use just to add more meaning. And for the thing we use which is the pronoun that used to replace thing or place. A block, that block which consists of which costs £5 million to build has been empty for years. So that block is already known which block. So which costs £5 million to build is the non-defining relative clause. It is separated by commas, and which is the pronoun that used for thing, place. Okay, for object, the relative pronoun that used for object to replace thing is which. That is not used here, and the which can never omit it. So when the relative pronoun that is the object, we cannot erase it. We use only which, we cannot use that. When it is the non-defining relative clause. Example: the book which you lent me last week is very interesting. So the book already understood which book. So the clause here is not important, it's not necessary. So we use other non-defining relative clause. And only which then can be used. In this case we cannot use that. We cannot say the book that you lent me last week is interesting. Only which that can be used when the relative clause is non-defining. The rice which we had for dinner last night was very good. So the rice, the clear, is already understood which rice. So we use other non-defining relative clause. Which we had for dinner last night is the non-defining relative clause, and is separated by comma. come in, and only pronoun which, relative pronoun which that can be used. Object of a preposition. So when the relative pronoun is used as the object of preposition and used to replace thing, we use which. The preposition come before which or more informally at the end of the clause. So we can use the preposition before the relative pronoun which. This is very grammatical. We can place at the end of the clause. This is a little bit informal. Example: hash down forest, hash down forest. Through which will be driving isn't a forest any longer. So through with the preposition, and we use which. So preposition can precede the non-defined relative clause. So we use which here. Through which we driving. This is the non-defined relative clause because the forest is already understood. One more. Hash down, we can also say hash down forest, which will be driving through. We can place the preposition at the end of the relative clause. Isn't a forest any longer. Okay, one more example. His house, for which he paid £10,000, is now worth £50,000. Or you can say his house, which he paid 10,000, which he paid £10,000 for, is now worth 50,000. We can place preposition before the relative noun or at the end of the relative clause. But this one is more grammatically, more formal. Okay, please continue. Okay, more possessive. The relative noun that use are possessive for thing. We use whose. Whose is generally used both for animal and thing. Example: his house, whose windows are all broken, was a depressing sight. So whose window, whose here replaces to the possessive of the house. I mean whose here mean whose window here mean the house window. The window of the house, or its windows mean the window of the house. Whose is the relative pronoun is used to replace the possession. The car whose handbrake wasn't very reliable began to slide backward. Whose handle brake wasn't very reliable is the non-defined relative clause. And whose here the pronoun that expresses the possession. Whose handle means the car's handle, or the handle of the car, so it handle brake, a handbrake. So. Okay, more using noun plus of which. An adjective clause may include a noun plus of which. This pattern carries the meaning of whose. So when we use this phrase noun of which, it means whose. This preposition as well. Example: they own an original Picasso painting, the value of which is over a million $1 million. Example. So we can also say here they own an original pixel painting whose value, we can say whose value is over a million. Whose value means the value of which. The value of which here, the meaning is whose. Position is better position. The value of which means the value of the painting. The painting values. One of my country is dependent upon its income from coffee, the price of which vary according to fluctuation in the world market. So the price of which, the price of which here is by the meaning whose, carry the meaning whose, whose price. The price of which we can say whose price, the same. Okay, using which to modify a whole sentence. We can also use the relative clause to add more meaning to the whole sentence. The pronoun that and this can refer to the idea of the whole sentence which comes before an adjective clause, with which may modify the idea of the whole sentence. Example: Tom was late, which surprised me. Tom was late, which surprised me. So which surprised me is the relative clause that add more meaning to the whole sentence. What surprised you is Tom was late. One more, I shut the car door on my necktie, which was really stupid of me. So which was really stupid of me is the relative clause that add more meaning to the whole sentence here. What was really stupid of me is the way I shut the car door on my necktie. One more, Max isn't home yet, which worry me. So which worry me is the relative clause that add more meaning to the whole sentence here. Mark, what worry you? What worry me is Mark isn't at home. Okay, point 7. Using expression of quality in adjective clause. An adjective clause may contain an expression of it, of, some of, many of, most of, none of, two of, half of, both of, neither of, each of, all of, several of, few of, little of, a number of. Example: only whom or which and whose are used in this pattern. So when we use this expression with of, we use whom. Only whom can be used for people, and only which that can be used for thing or place, and only whose that can be used to express the position. We cannot use of which. Only whom is used for people. Example: in my class there are 20 students, most of whom are from Far East. So most of whom, this is we use only whom, not most of who, or we cannot say most of who or most of that. We cannot use who or that in this. Only whom. Only relative noun whom that can be used for people. One more, the village has around 200 people, the majority of whom are farmers. So we say the majority of whom, only whom, relative noun whom that can be used. The majority of whom here means the majority of the villager. The farmer or the people, the villager, the majority of the people are farmers. Only which is used for thing. Example, he gave several reasons, only a few of which were valid. So only a few of which, in this case, we use only which. We cannot use that. That replace for the that add more meaning to the thing. So relative noun which is used to replace thing, and only which that can be used in this expression. Only a few of which. One more. I tried on 6 pair of shoes, none of which we can say. I tried on 6 pair of shoes, none of which I like. So none of which which mean shoes, none of the shoes. Only a few of which here mean only a few of reasons. So which here is the relative noun used to replace shoes. Which here is the relative noun used to replace reasons. Okay, only whose is used for position. Example, the teacher discussed Jim, none of whose problem was poor study habit. So none of whose here, none of whose mean none of his problem, none of whose problem and none of his problem. The Jim problem was his poor habit. Tim, one of whose son failed the exam last year, worked in a factory. She worked in a factory for the team. So one of whose means one of Tim's son. One of whose son means one of Tim's son or his son. So whose here reflects the position. Okay, this is the end of the chapter 14 part B, that is about non-defined relative clause. I hope that this video will be enjoyable and you can understand clearly, because in my typical you learn the defined relative clause in the previous video already. So in this video just is about defined relative clause. This is just opposite between non-defined and defined. Non-defined is not necessary, defined is necessary. We cannot omit it. Okay, thanks you for watching, and I hope that at home you will try your best to learn and do the exercise in the book and submit me on time. Thank you, bye bye, see you.